Hello. Very warm welcome to this session. We're going to talk about digital autonomy from device to cloud. I'm Adrian O'Sullivan. I come from Ireland, and I'm going to be joined by JB, or John Baptiste, who is from Brittany in France. So we have a great delight to be here in Paris. Personally, Ireland and France, we get on very, very well. Good rivalry in rugby. We've even forgiven you for the Thierry Henry handball, if any of you remember it. So today I'm going to talk about an important topic that's becoming extra hot, which is around digital autonomy. So there's a whole track here around European. So there's a lot of talks on at the moment around how digital autonomy affects us all. So I just want to level set and make sure that we're all on the same page about what digital autonomy means. So what it really means is to have a balance. So it's not saying close the markets. It's basically saying that for any players that want to operate here in Europe, that there is a competitive advantage for that have a free and access to certain a balanced influence of technology. So one of the things that is really important for digital autonomy is that companies, small companies, you could be many small companies here today, that you have the ability to actually have a chance to create companies that can challenge, that can actually challenge some of the bigger guys and actually operate out of Europe, basically with strong European values, in operating in Europe. So this is kind of what digital autonomy means. But digital autonomy, to actually achieve it, it's all well and good talking about it, right? But I mean, I had the pleasure of meeting, the Commissioner Vestager when she came to Trinity, and I got to see firsthand, what she meant in terms of how she wants to see digital autonomy implemented in Ireland or in Europe. So what I've seen is that there's a strong, will to create regulation to make sure that digital autonomy can be achieved. So you might have heard of some of the acts that are actually being created. So you have the Digital Market Act and you have Digital Service Act, among many. If you look at the Digital Markets Act, it's really around making sure and ensuring that there's fair and open digital markets for all. So if you look at the Digital Markets Act, there's a term called gatekeepers. So gatekeepers really have a strong power about how access to services are actually achieved. By actually opening up the Digital Markets Act, is trying to make sure and ensure that smaller players that can have a fair access to be able to compete. And that means a lot, very much important for small, medium enterprises in Europe and startups. There's a strong startup culture where I'm from in Ireland. It gives them a chance to actually get a footing and compete. There's also the Digital Services Act, which really is more looking around security and creating a safe and accountable online environment. So even though we're talking about digital autonomy, we're actually talking about also bringing in the regulations here in Europe to make sure that it's achieved, that these are actually possible. So I'm going to start by the journey today by starting with device, and then we're going to move on to looking through the cloud. But even when I talk about device, and all of you have a smartphone here in your pocket, we've seen the massive effect that the smart devices have had over the last 12 to 14 years, I suppose, since smart devices or smartphones first came about, and it now becomes a central part of our everyday life. But as we go towards 2025, what we're seeing is that there's a lot more smart devices appearing on the market. So the average, by 2025, the average person will have 9 devices, smart devices in their home. So you may already have a couple already, you may have 4 or 5. You might have a smart speaker, a smart TV, smart door lock, but in future there's going to be more and more of these devices. But if you look about these devices and the way that they're actually set up, they're all working around an ecosystem where they connect via the cloud. Okay, so even though these devices are inside your home, the ecosystems for these devices that are being created is that they are actually dependent on connection through cloud gatekeepers, right? So again, if you look at the Digital Market Act, that would be considered gatekeepers. We know there's 2 very large ones here that are in Europe, and what you see is that when you create all these devices and the communication between them, needing applications that communicate via the cloud, what actually that makes is that it ends up that you have competing ecosystems, and a lot of the time, unfortunately for us, the consumers of these features, we actually get no interoperability between the different ecosystems. So it makes it hard for devices that are even yours, they're yours in your own home, to communicate, because the ecosystem, the applications that are there are operating through these gatekeeper systems up into the cloud. So it's not the best from a digital autonomy point of view. So what would be potentially a better solution to this? So one of the things that we have done is basically looked at creating an open source project. It is housed in and hosted in the Eclipse Foundation, which is a European, the largest European open source foundation that provides vendor neutral governance, because it's very, very important that when you actually try to make something that will actually communicate with as many devices as possible, that you give equal voice to all participants that are in the ecosystem. And that's why it's very important to have it hosted in an environment like the Eclipse Foundation. But one of the key things is that we're trying to do with Onero is that to make sure that the communication mechanisms, we're not saying that you do not need the cloud, but you should not always need the cloud. To make sure that the devices can operate in a mesh network, communicating directly with each other, sharing their capabilities. So the devices that you create can share their capabilities with one another and communicate around one another when it makes sense to communicate directly with each other. For example, if you're sitting in your home, the devices in your home generally don't need to communicate through the cloud to actually operate. Whereas, for example, in times you may say, look, like a smart door lock, if you actually want to or a smart camera from home, you may need a cloud connection. So what we're saying is that by actually having these device virtualization framework work together and allow the devices to communicate without the need for the cloud, it's important from a digital autonomy point of view. So what does this capability? So one of the capabilities of Onero is to center it around you, the consumer. So it's giving you the choice of what enters your circle of friends, right? I know there's when you actually appear and you actually, the person is in the middle, you can bring and drag and drop your devices that you trust into your circle of trusted devices. Once they're in that circle of trusted devices, they're your devices, and if they need to interoperate with each other, they can use this mesh network to communicate with each other to actually make sure that the communication stays within your four walls of your home. You get to choose which devices interoperate with each other and how they interoperate with each other. It's not that they have to have a first connection to the cloud first mentality that's there with the existing ecosystems that you have today. So what does that really mean in terms of what is in it for you? So, all of you here today would all be consumers, right? You all have devices in your pockets. So your devices collectively work with each other, right? So what you want to actually be able to do is go into any shop, and as you buy these devices, you buy your smart kettle, you buy your smart door lock, that they should all start natively communicating with each other without this need for the cloud connection all the time. From a device maker, so if we have members here as a technical audience, if we have people that are actually from device makers, it gives you the chance to create one operating system that actually runs across all your devices, big and small. So if you're working with devices that are sensor devices running MCUs, or you're working on higher powered devices like smart TVs, using CPUs, you can build the same framework, the same language of how the communication and the operating system works together. So this is very important for device makers. And finally, for content creators, one of the key things that is stopping a lot of the ease of interaction between devices is that when you're building your applications, they're built for a specific target device. What we have with this ability with Onero is that you create the operating system, or you create the applications, and you can create the same application that may run on your smartwatch, smartphone, and also interact with a smart kettle, for example. So you're building the application framework layer to take account that the operating system is common across all the devices that you're running across. So the services that they actually use are shared in terms of how they actually work together in the device virtualization framework. So this again gives greater ability to create unique experiences with Onero that is focused around the consumer. So that's one of the key assets of for content creators. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleague, JB, who's going to take you through another, from the cloud perspective. So here's JB.
All right. Thank you, Adrian. First of all, do you want in French or in English? Because I can do both. Any preference? English? Better? Okay, fine. So when we take a look on the cloud market today, we can see that there are some kind of action in the ecosystem. So we can see we have some regulation from the European Commission in Europe, like Data Act, but we also have some industry ecosystem enforcement, I would say, about communication on the cloud, like GAIA-X. So clearly today, when we take a look on the market, on the cloud market, we can see that this cloud market is concentrated on some big players, what we name hyperscalers. And the reason is not because they have data centers everywhere in every region or whatever. It's because they're offering more services than the others, clearly. And so what we can see today is this concentration of the hyperscalers is actually protected by themselves. And what we name low-code, meaning that it's not possible for software vendors to add a pure managed service on a cloud provider. So it means that imagine I'm a software vendor, and I would like to deploy my software on the cloud. Currently, I have only two options. The first option is I create an image, operating system image, container image, whatever. Or I create a software as a service. So I create my SaaS solution that I offer to my users. But in the two cases, it's pretty hard for me to be fully integrated into the cloud provider ecosystem. So I have a dual billing system. I have a dual logging, or I would say observability, generally speaking, etc. So today, this means that there are no way for the software vendor to create managed service by their own. So we have a lockout software vendor system. But we also have a locking for the end users. So now imagine you are a user on a cloud provider. You are, for instance, you are on AWS. You are using Lambda. If you are using Lambda, you are stuck with AWS because Lambda does not exist on Azure, does not exist on Huawei Cloud, whatever. So it means that as soon as you use Lambda, you're going to be locked in the cloud provider. So you only have two options, basically. Again, the first option is you are taking the least common denominator, which is the services available on any cloud provider, like a VM, like we can assume Kubernetes, but Kubernetes could be something that we can discuss because Kubernetes on EKS or AKS is not exactly the same, clearly. Or you specialize your solution for each cloud provider. So you say this application go on AWS, this application go on Azure, and you specialize your application. So you have a kind of locking system because as soon as you decided to go with AWS, you're going to be stuck on AWS, for instance. So today, when we see multi-cloud, it's very limited. I mean, there are no way to have portable services across any cloud provider. So we have very limitation and locking on the users. And so we can talk about also the data. So the data, we can say, okay, I don't have any issue with my data because I can export my data and import somewhere else. Yeah, but actually, if you don't have a computing system that manages this data, you're going to be stuck. I mean, the fact that you can extract Redshift data is not possible to import another thing than Redshift. So you can port from Redshift to another Redshift, but you cannot port from Redshift to Iceberg, for instance, out of the box. So actually, with data, we have locking and lockout because you are completely locked to the data, but also the computing resources using your data. So what we plan and what we started is Open Services Cloud, which is a new initiative at Eclipse. And really the target and the objective of Open Services Cloud is to open up the underlying layers. Let me explain what is these underlying layers. Any cloud provider today, they have some kind of fundamentals API they are using to create managed service. AWS, Azure, anyone, JCP, when they have to create a new service, they don't reinvent the wheel. They're just using some private fundamentals API they have on their own. But again, these APIs are private. Nobody can use it. Only the cloud provider can use it. So what we want to do with Open Services Cloud is to give an access to this fundamentals API, allowing anyone to create a portable managed service. So that's exactly the purpose of Open Service Cloud. And thanks to that, we remove locking and the lockout approach. So imagine now I'm a software vendor. I can describe my software, my service, my managed service using a descriptor. This descriptor is submitted to a runtime, Open Service Cloud, that will actually create the managed service on any cloud. So we have a real multi-cloud experience. So it means that we have also portable managed services that we can deploy on any cloud provider. So by opening this service layer, that's unleash the managed service. So it means that anyone can deploy it. So if we combine both, so Adrian introduced the Oniro project and Open Service Cloud, both together, we can completely reshape the way of communication between devices, but also the way that the managed services are deployed on cloud providers. So if you want to say some more, Adrian, but you can visit us on the Huawei booth if you need, and if you want some technical details about Oniro Open Service Cloud, just join us on the booth. We will be more than happy to show you some demos, some blueprints we have extra. You can find the Oniro and Open Service Cloud resources on the Eclipse website. So you find all the details on this slide.
Yeah, just want to welcome anyone that wants to join. It's an open community. We're very welcoming. So, go to the website. You'll see the community channels that are there. Contact us. It's one of the beauties of the governance structure of both these projects is that, whether you're a company, a large company or a company of 2 people, you actually get the same voice. It's got a great structure. The governance structure that is there is set up to make sure that from a digital autonomy point of view, the actual ability for small companies to have a say in how the architecture is put together is really, really, really strong. So welcome any new members to come out and maybe have a chat with us at the booth. We're just down the corridor here on the right, and we'd be very happy to give you some demonstrations, dive deeper into the architectures, and happy to have a chat with you. So please visit the booth. Thank you very much.
No, it's on the booth.
Yeah, so we have basically for the different projects, we have 6 different projects out there. Some of them aren't covered here, but we have some live demonstrations and we also have technical presentations. So for example, for Oniro, I can take you through the technical architecture if you come to the booth. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think. No one is kicking us out, so. Yeah.
First of all, I'm going right there and see how the thing is going, and make sure I can have a team before asking stupid question. There is no stupid question, but whatever, I'll come back.
Yeah.
Anyways, thanks so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Very welcome.
Any other questions? If we have, I think we have a couple of minutes, so if you have any questions. Okay, all good?
Yeah, if no questions, enjoy your lunch. And come visit us.